question of what makes something literary is an enduring one, and I don't expect that we'll answer it fully in this short video. Instead, I want to show you a few different ways that literary critics approach this question, and then offer a short summary of the 3 big factors that we must consider when we ask the question ourselves. Let's begin by making a distinction between literature with a capital L and literature with a small l. Literature with a small l designates any written text. We can talk about the literature on any given subject without much difficulty. Literature with a capital L, by contrast, designates a much smaller set of texts, a subset of all the texts that have been written. So, what makes a text literary? Or what makes a text literature with a capital L? Let's start with the word itself. Literature comes from Latin, and it originally meant the use of letters, or writing. But when the word entered the Romance languages that derived from Latin, it took on the additional meaning of knowledge acquired from reading or studying books. So we might use this definition to understand literature with a capital L as writing that gives us knowledge, writing that should be studied. But this begs the further question, what books or texts are worth studying? For some critics, answering this question is a matter of establishing canonicity. A work of literature becomes canonical when cultural institutions like schools or universities or prize committees classify it as a work of lasting artistic or cultural merit. The canon, however, has proved problematic as a measure of what literature with a capital L is, because the gatekeepers of the Western canon have traditionally been white and male. It was only in the closing decades of the 20th century that the canon of literature was open to a greater inclusion of diverse authors. And here's another problem with that definition. If inclusion in the canon were our only definition of literature, then there could be no such thing as contemporary literature, which, of course, has not yet stood the test of time. And here's an even bigger problem. Not every book that receives good reviews or wins a prize turns out to be of lasting value in the eyes of later readers. On the other hand, a novel like Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which was not well received by critics or readers when it was first published in 1851, has since gone on to become a mainstay of the American literary canon. As you can see, canonicity is obviously a problematic index of literariness. So, what's the alternative? Well, we could just go with a descriptive definition. If you love it, then it's literature. But that's a little too subjective. For example, no matter how much you may love a certain book from your childhood, I love The Very Hungry Caterpillar, that doesn't automatically make it literary, no matter how many times you've reread it. Okay, so literature with a capital L cannot always be defined by its inclusion in the canon, or the fact that it has been well received. So what is it then? Well, for other critics, what makes something literature would seem to be qualities within the text itself. According to the critic Derek Attridge, there are 3 qualities that define modern Western literature. 1. A quality of invention, or inventiveness in the text itself. 2. The reader's sense that what they're reading is singular, in other words, the unique vision of the writer herself. And 3. A sense of otherness that pushes the reader to see the world around them in a new way. Notice that nowhere in this 3-part definition is there any limitation on the content of literature. Instead, we call something literature when it affects the reader at the level of style and construction, rather than substance. In other words, literature can be about anything. The idea that a truly literary text can change a reader is of course older than this modern definition. In the English tradition, poetry was preferred over novels because it was thought to create mature and sympathetic reader citizens. Likewise, in the Victorian era, it was argued that reading so-called great works of literature was the best way for readers to realize their full spiritual potentials in an increasingly secular world.